afternoon. My name is Dominique Pettiford and I'm a graduating speech language pathology major. My research proposal was on the effects that domestic violence has on children who witness it. So I want to read a quote where it said, "Children exposed to violence in their family show the same brain pattern activities that those soldiers who have witnessed in combat." I had a big research question, but I broke it down into two parts because I do believe the two correlate. So the first part of it was, what are some effects that domestic violence has on children? And the second part was, are children who witness domestic violence in the home more prone to being violent? A brief introduction. The Department of Justice does consider domestic violence as a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship where one partner does exert or gain or maintain power over another. There are 5 types of domestic violence. Originally, people just think that physical and sexual abuse are the only 2 types of domestic violence, but there's also emotional, economic, and psychological. Physical would be physically placing your hands on someone. Sexual would be having sexual intercourse with somebody without their consent, so kind of like rape. Emotional would be exerting control over them and making them feel some kind of way about themselves, or having low self-esteem and believing that others don't love them or they don't love themselves as much as you do. Economic could be one of 2 things, where you are the breadwinner and you make them do all kind of things and make them feel bad just because you're giving them money and providing for them. Or they could be going out kind of like a pimp and a prostitute and doing all the work but bringing you all the money home. And then the last would be psychological. Psychological abuse is just kind of goes hand in hand with emotional, and it's probably the longest, in my opinion, the longest felt or the longest thought about kind of domestic violence. So the significance of the study, there's about 4 things that I thought were really significant. For one, women ages 18 to 34 are at risk of becoming victims of domestic violence. They're the largest group. 15.5 million children live in homes where domestic violence occurs. 5 million children do witness domestic violence each year in the United States. And lastly, living with domestic violence significantly alters your child's DNA to age prematurely from 7 to 10 years. So children are exposed to domestic violence in so many ways. For one, hearing threats of physical harm, seeing their mother being beaten or someone coming at their mother when they're in their mother's arms, being denied care because the mother's ill or depressed, being forced to watch or participate in violence against their mother, and seeing the aftermath of violent incidents, and also being taken hostage or forcing the mother to be kept a certain way because they kept us from home. So the purpose of my study is to investigate domestic violence and the correlations on effects and outcomes that children who witness this kind of a violence have. So out of all my literature reviews, this is kind of my favorite one. It analyzed the effects of child abuse and domestic violence exposure on childhood, adolescent suppressing and expressing behaviors. Data for this analysis was from the Lehigh longitudinal study of 457 students, and it took students from all kind of backgrounds and got information and statistical data on them in order to gain this information. The results showed that those who experience child abuse, domestic violence, or dual exposure, which is both of them, that increased the child's risk of internalizing or externalizing adolescent outcomes. Those children with dual exposure had an elevated risk of becoming abusers or being abused. There were some noticeable differences in the prediction of outcomes for children with dual exposure, and it also showed that boys and girls went hand in hand, and they had the both same kind of statistically comparable exposure and effects. So our methodology would be, I'll make it a meta-analysis, which is doing quantitative and qualitative research. The quantitative side would the qualitative side is what I really want to start with. So getting interviews and doing questionnaires, which would be, I want to do some open-ended but I want to do more so closed-ended, and do some exploratory research. And the quantitative side of it, side of it would be once I got the qualitative data, I would want to go in and look at the research statistics and the crime rates and the crime statistic of those children who did certain things when they experienced domestic violence. The data will consist of interviews, crime statistics, case studies, and journal articles with critical analysis of exploratory and explanatory information. I would also try to get some transcription so that I can look in depth of how people do feel. So my main target population would be women 18 and older, only because my sister's going to college, so starting off, I would just think about how in college you're exposed to a lot of things that you're not exposed to when you are a child, because your parents protect you. And just, being in abusive relationships is not only physical or sexually abusive. It can be so many other things that she or other college age women could be exposed to. I also wanted to target African American women because they're the largest group of victims and they reported more, although Hispanic males are arrested at a higher percentage rate than any other race for domestic violence disputes. I would have 30 participants, seven adolescents and 3 adults from each race that I choose. So I would have African American, Caucasian, and Latino Hispanic. So my research design and procedure, I would get interviews from the 9 adults and try to gain some more clarification on anything that I may not understand. And then I also want to do some questionnaires for them, but those would be more so open-ended. And then for the 21 students, I want to review their records and have them fill out anonymous surveys and questionnaires, because I do know that being that they're from this information or from this environment already, they already feel as though they're being judged. They have to protect their families. So I never want them to feel as though they're trying to tell on anyone or anything like that. For the younger ones who are unable to be verbally inept, so if they're infants or toddlers, I want to watch, I want to take I want to take observations and do them in about 15-minute intervals with them interacting with a caregiver or a professional. And then the interviews, like I stated, they will be informal, open-ended, and conversation-like, so that they feel as comfortable as possible, and it's more like the true nature of their behaviors rather than them feeling as though they're put on display and they have to act a certain way. My miscellaneous materials, I did a survey that was closed-ended. I asked about 5 questions, and I gave them options and didn't allow for any elaboration so that I can get a better bias, I guess, data, so that I can put it in this research proposal and in my research that I do myself. And the questions were created from some discussions that I had just about domestic violence, about rape culture, about child abuse and things like that. They were very important to me. And here's some of my references. I really enjoy children and things like that, so I'm looking forward to the research that I have to do and finding out more information about things that shouldn't be so taboo as far as child abuse, child neglect, domestic violence, and rape culture. So, there's it.